You're listening to and/or are watching the mother of all talk shows, along with hundreds of thousands of people across the world. We need your calls, we need your messages, we need your response to this poll. Is it safe to let children return to schools? A, yes, 31%, down 5. B, no, 69%, up 5. You can vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. 1,248 of you have voted thus far. You've got just less than an hour to record your opinion on that question, which is going to become a very big issue indeed. Now, as I said earlier, it's been a pretty bad week for the US intelligence community. First of all, the fabricated case against General Michael Flynn has fallen apart. And the US Justice Department has walked away from their previous prosecution of him in connection with the Russiagate affair. I feel a personal link to this because just couple of months before he was arrested, I was sitting at the same dinner table as him in Moscow, where he was an invited and paid speaker at the RT anniversary celebrations. The Russiagate mania then claimed that he was somehow in Moscow as part of Donald Trump's Russian entanglements and that somehow he was betraying his country. Nothing could be more absurdly far from the truth. And so, although I share nothing in common with General Michael Flynn, nothing at all, I know because I've had a long talk with him, I think that he was grievously the victim of an injustice. And so I'm very glad that the deep state persecution of Flynn has now fallen apart. And then there was the revelation in the grey zone, I think just about the most significant of the new media outlets that are plying their trade today. And if you're not following them, you really, really must. The Grey Zone revealed, Max Blumenthal revealed, their star writer, that the CIA were actually employing the people that the Ecuador government thought they were employing to guard their embassy and their most famous inhabitant in any embassy, anywhere ever in the world, namely Julian Assange. But in fact, this company, a Spanish company of private investigators, security company, were working for the CIA. And not just that, but working for a man called Sheldon Adelson. He was the cutout. He's a larger-than-life casino owner in Las Vegas. I'm not making this up. He's also, of course, Israel's #1 man in America. He is the font of undreamt of sums of money given to people who are supportive of Israel, and he's also the man who spends the money to take down people that are not sufficiently supportive of Israel. So the CIA took another hit. But the biggest hit is surely the Bay of Piglets attempt to invade Venezuela from the sea with a gang of idiots that were captured by the fishermen and women off the coast of Venezuela. Now, our next guest links, in a way, all of these stories because he is a journalist and contributor to the Grey Zone, the Canary, and, of course, our own Sputnik. And he's the editor of theinterregnum.net. And he's here, I hope, to speak to me now. Mohamed Elmaazi, welcome very much to the mother of all talk shows. Let's start with the Venezuela fiasco. Just bring the listeners and viewers who are not perhaps as up to date as you on this story with what happened.
Thank you very much for having me, George, on your show. Yeah, so briefly, it's all very dogs of war for anybody who's aware of the reference. Essentially, a private mercenary force apparently enlisted for the sum of $213 million, according to a contractor, $212.9 million, to capture, detain, or remove Nicolas Maduro, as well as to secure certain areas in the country on behalf of self-appointed interim president and opposition figure Juan Guaidó, who's backed by the United States government and is also recognized by governments such as that of Britain. This mercenary force, which had a few former U.S. Special Forces members, Green Berets, that's a branch of the U.S. Army, so U.S. Army Special Forces, along with at least 60 military, police, National Guard defectors from the Venezuelan state over the years, were all part of this mission. At least 8 were killed. I think it looks like far more now are known to have been killed. Others captured. Gaudreau, apparently, so Jordan Gaudreau, who's the CEO of Silvercorp, this unit, or who's still in the United States, so he's safe. He's not captured in Venezuela. He himself has come out, said that this was, that he was part of this. He hasn't denied it. We've seen passports of the Green Berets, as well as their ID cards belonging to Silvercorp that they apparently took with them to Venezuela. And yeah, this is all in the context of incredibly crushing U.S. sanctions on the country of Venezuela that have been going on for years now. They began under Obama, but escalated much further under the administration of Donald Trump, with the explicit goal of effecting regime change, and which have resulted in, according to one estimate from the Center of, one report from the Center of Economic and Policy Research, a Washington, D.C. based think tank, has resulted in at least 40,000 excess deaths in Venezuela in 1 year alone, 2017 to 2018. When people think, on the one hand, yes, it seems like a complete fiasco, which doesn't make them look good at all, doesn't make the United States government look good. On the other hand, this is within the wider context of continued attempts for regime change and the overthrow of the government, the democratically elected government, which a whole host of international observers have said, are free and fair, for an electoral system which Jimmy Carter himself has said, described as being a model. Forbes magazine did an investigation in 2013 and called Venezuela's electoral system a model for the world, notwithstanding statements that people have made since then. And yet, from 2002, as you may recall, when Hugo Chavez was president, to today, there have been countless now attempts to overthrow the government that have been overtly and covertly backed by the United States government.
And yet this
appears to be the latest.
The United States is a country that claims that Russia interfered in its election in 2016 and has adopted law after law to preclude anyone seeking from abroad to be interfering in their politics. Yet this same country is expending hundreds of millions of dollars to employ hired killers to change the regime in someone else's country.
Yeah, it would appear so. I mean, they're claiming deniability. I don't know how plausible it is. Because this contract that we've seen, which the Washington Post has now published on its site, there's 2 separate contracts. One which actually, in part of it, explicitly states that the mercenary force has authority under the contract to use deadly force in quote-unquote high collateral damage areas to when they're targeting certain figures. But so the contract appears to be with Juan Guaidó, who is the person who's backed by Mike Pompeo, Donald Trump, Elliot Abrams, and others. And we were hearing things only a few days before this foiled plot from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who said that actually the momentum is building and there are plans underway to reopen the U.S. Embassy in Venezuela. Also, there were tweets, not so cryptic tweets, from regime change hawk John Bolton, who was until recently a member of the Trump administration, that seemed to suggest something was happening. And it's worth noting, and I'm sure that we'll discuss this in a moment, that this contract was signed in the autumn of last year, October 2019, which is the same time period that the British Foreign Office apparently opened up a secret unit around the same time, which it started to liaise with the Venezuelan opposition, specifically members of the Venezuelan opposition who were linked to violent attempts to overthrow the democratically elected government of Nicolas Maduro.
Yes, I will come back to that. But first, if the United States itself as a state was not involved in this invasion and incursion into Venezuela, why have the Trump administration said that if these two Green Berets are not released, that the United States will come and get them, will come and rescue them, even though, by any standards, they are guilty of a serious crime?
That's exactly right. And as I said, whatever levels of denials that we've heard, given the fact that we were getting messaging from key government figures like Mike Pompeo that something was coming up. So I think it was the 29th of April, Mike Pompeo had made statements that I mentioned only moments ago, that we should expect something is coming and that the U.S. Embassy will be reopening Venezuela. It sort of lends itself to the idea that the U.S. government, the U.S. states, even if they weren't directing it from the start, were at least aware of it and were supportive of it. And I should say that according to the best friend of Jordan Goodrow, a former Special Forces man himself, who's not part of this operation as far as we know, he told Anya Parampil of the Gray Zone on her show when she spoke to him via phone, and I recommend that people listen to that program, Red Lines on the Gray Zone, where he had said that Goodrow had told him that there was a contact of the U.S. State Department that was aware of and supported the contract. So even if the United States was using a sort of a cutout, if you like, nonetheless, there is quite a lot of evidence, I think, even if it's circumstantial.
Quite a lot of evidence in this case, but if you look at the book, the United States has done this in practically every continent for 75 years at least. So there's no reason to disbelieve the theory that the United States was up to its neck in this attempt. What is more surprising, at least to some of our viewers and listeners, will be that the British government was involved in a secret plan with violent oppositionists seeking the violent overthrow of a recognized government, not by Britain, but recognized by the United Nations and therefore covered by international law, to get contracts for British companies to rebuild Venezuela before they've even destroyed it fully.
That's right. That's actually a brilliant expose by a colleague of mine from the Canary, John McAvoy, and I interviewed him for Sputnik on his very piece, which is the product of government documents that he obtained through a series of Freedom of Information requests. And in those documents, he discovered the existence of a previously unknown unit in the Foreign Office, the British Foreign Office, called the Venezuela Reconstruction Unit. And as he points out, before you can have reconstruction, you have to have deconstruction, or at least destruction. And that is, interestingly enough, the creation of this unit seems to come about at the exact same time that this contract is signed between Juan Guaidó, the right-wing opposition figure, and Silvercorp, the US-based mercenary security force behind this failed coup or incursion. So if you look at some of the documents are redacted, but according to the information that we do know, that he uncovered, John McAvoy uncovered, former UK ambassador to Venezuela and a longtime ambassador elsewhere was one of the key figures, or is one of the key figures in this Venezuela reconstruction unit. And as you say, they have been liaising covertly and secretly with members of the right-wing opposition who are linked to calls for violent overthrow of their government, including links to, support for the United States in doing so, which I think here and in the United States, that would be known as treason, just flat out, right, without mincing words. That this unit has mention of business interests that British businesses would have access to, without going to specifics. But some of your viewers may be aware that Venezuela sits upon the largest known oil reserves on the planet, although much of it is hard to get at. It's not the highest quality oil. It is nonetheless incredibly large in terms of its reserves. Venezuela is one of the, if not the single largest supplier of oil to the United States, and that didn't stop under the current government.
Mohamed Elmaazi, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to speed on the dirty business with Venezuela. Thanks very much indeed for that.